Hi everyone, Katerina from Minecraft here. I have decided to make a video about my experience listening to Gabor Mate in Prague, where he gave his talk on the 25th of May. I know there are many fans and people who follow his work, and I've decided to share what I've heard, what resonated with me, what I've learned, and I wanted to share it with you. I don't at all call myself an expert on Gabor Mate's work, not at all. However, the way he approaches the topics of his work deeply resonate with me and touch me on a very personal level. And even though I haven't read all of his books, I do feel, really drawn to his work. So I have notes on my phone, and I'll be looking at them. And if you've never heard of Gabor Mate, or you don't know who he is, I'll just say that he's a physician, a medical doctor. Was born in Hungary during the Second World War. He's born a Jew into a Jewish family, and those few years of his life have actually greatly impacted his later work through personal experience of true trauma. He lives in Canada and spent many years helping people with serious addictions. And it was through helping them that he actually got to the root cause of trauma. He's a great expert on trauma, and looks at it from a very different perspective to most people in the field. His definition of trauma is it's not what happened to you that causes trauma. Trauma is what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you. And trauma isn't, in his work, the great tragic events that happen to people. What he specializes in is, it can be the little things in one's life that simply we were not able to deal with, especially as children. And it left us wounded in some way. And we carried that wound with us into adulthood. So I saw Gabor Mate in Prague. Very fortunate to come from Prague. So I was able to go and see him there almost 2 weeks ago now. And the way he runs his talks is that it's pretty much a question and answer setup. So he gave a very brief introduction, and then it was handed over to the audience to ask questions. And quite a lot of the questions actually turned out to be topics in his new book, which he's written. It's finished and it's due to be out, I think, in September. And I mean, straight away, as he started talking, you know, his warmth and genuinity, authenticity, and of course, wisdom just had like almost like a healing effect on me. Yeah, just to be in his presence is, yeah, can be very healing. And it's part of what he talks about is that to be present to someone who is experiencing something difficult in their life, you know, with compassion and empathy can in itself be transformative and healing. Okay, so I'm going to my notes. So there, he's got interesting links to Czech Republic, to Czechoslovakia. I'm going to skip that, but I'll put it in the comments of my posts to those, my fellow Czechs who may be interested in that. Gabor is 78 years old. I don't know if you've seen him, but he looks incredibly well. So he opened his talk explaining that the origin of the word trauma is from the Greek word for wound. So when you think of a wound, it is sensitive. So it makes us feel sensitive, and it hurts. So if you have a injury on your body, your shoulder, and it scars, if you touch the wound, you automatically react. So trauma is scarring. It makes us inflexible. It makes us feel rigid and makes it impossible for us to grow in our life. And he describes as the biggest trauma of all is disconnection from ourselves. Disconnection from ourselves. He gave so his biggest trauma. He shares in his books, but he came back to it in this talk, and he said recently he'd gone through his mother's possessions, and he found a diary that she kept when he was a baby. And he found an entry from when he was 2 weeks old. And in the diary, his mother wrote, "Poor Gabor, he's been crying now for an hour and a half. My heart is breaking. But I promised the doctor that I would only feed him every 4 hours." So he asked, how was I made to feel as a baby, with a true need, where his mother went against her instincts and listened to the doctor rather than her own instinct. I think to mothers that are listening to this will really resonate. Someone asked what can protect us or prevent us from experiencing trauma. And he replied that it's a human connection. And it starts with at a young age when we're children, very, very young children. He says it's very important that children are allowed to express their emotion, because they're not able, their nervous system is not able to regulate their own emotions. They need an adult to be there for them, to witness them, witness their needs. And even if they can't prevent pain, by being there with them with compassion, they can prevent trauma. Yes, so he's explaining that there may be pain, but there will be no trauma if we can be present to our children's emotions, their expression of them. And that's key. Now, that it requires us to be vulnerable or be okay with being vulnerable. Now, again, looking at the origin of the word vulnerable, it means a wound. And Gabor says that we are vulnerable from the day we are conceived. And the result of trauma can be that we shut off, we close our hearts. And when you look at nature, what happens to life when it shuts off, then its growth is impossible. So when you look at a crab that is inside a shell, it cannot grow. And that's why so many people are afraid of therapy, because they're afraid of experiencing the pain again. And trauma is essentially disconnection from wanting to experience that. Gabor quoted a study that I myself found incredibly intriguing and also confirmed for me exactly how I felt about this whole topic. It was a study of children during the World War II in London, during the Blitz, the bombing of London. And at that time, many thousands of children were moved, taken away from their families for their own safety into countryside to live with, other families or to be in convents. And yeah, and the study followed the children for many decades afterwards. They followed children who were removed from London and were away, separated from their parents, and the children who stayed in London with their parents. So despite the danger and risk to life that it meant to stay in London, I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that it was the children that remained with their family despite the danger that actually had a much better mental health by the time they reached adulthood, not the children that were removed from their families for their own safety. So it was the presence of the adult that could be empathetic to how the children felt that prevented trauma. They couldn't prevent pain and suffering maybe, but they prevented trauma. Okay. So Gabor in his new book has a whole chapter on women and giving birth and the experience of that and the current setup in the world, which basically takes away the agency of women to make decisions for themselves, and the current medical setup, which discourages following what your body is telling you, and it encourages disconnection from the body. And in that respect, I feel very fortunate that this was not my case. But disconnection from the body is, a big theme, and it can, result in trauma. Someone asked about his view of what is called a spiritual bypass. And he talked about, he didn't name names, but he talked about several people who he had previously followed and even quoted, who wrote incredible books about enlightenment and living a spiritual life, yet actually abused their own students. So he dropped their work and never quoted it again. And he said, if you ever want to follow anyone, make sure that you check they have done their emotional work, and that they apply the same principles that they talk about and write about in their own private lives. There was a question about endometriosis. Gabor confirmed that in his view, endometriosis is a trauma response, which actually all chronic illnesses are. And he quotes studies that show that trauma affects the body, hormones, our nervous system, and the whole body. Yet at the moment, these studies are being they're definitely not in the mainstream, and they're being kind of ignored. And someone else asked about the potential of music to heal. And Gabor talked about, every sound in nature can be, healing. Bird songs, water bubbling, rustle of leaves, music. He described music as our soul, the Mother Nature's heartbeat. And so definitely music can heal. He pointed out that the first part of the brain that actually is developed when we're born is the emotional part of our brain. And then I think that what I'll finish with is someone asked him if he has a vision for the future and approach to trauma. And he talked about, the fact that actually he dedicated a whole chapter to his book, the last chapter in his new book, and that he understands that, it's going to take time. It will take baby steps. But his vision is that all professions, medical professionals, educators, teachers, all professions that come into contact with people to support them, should base their approach on being informed, be trauma informed. And that for the future, that may really change everything. And he also talked about a need for authenticity on a personal level, and our need for human connection and communality, that the individualistic life we live in right now, the current setup in the society, is actually is causing damage. We're not set up to live in these compartmentalized units. We're supposed to live in true communities, like, you know, as we evolved, we did. Okay, and one last point, because a lot of his work was about helping people who are truly addicted to drugs, was that we punish those who turn to drugs for their pain, and we criminalize them and put them in prisons. Yet those who turn to alcohol, they're okay. So I hope this was useful. It gave you some insights. I'd love to hear comments on maybe your personal experience with Gabor's work or what I've mentioned in this video. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Bye for now.